Welcome in to CBS News 24/7. I'm Juliette Goodrich. A campus in shock. The new developments now on the suspect in the deadly mass shooting at Florida State University. And we are expected to hear from the U.S. Senator coming home from meeting a Maryland man mistakenly deported to El Salvador. And a brain chip the size of a postage stamp is just one step closer to possibly helping millions of Americans with disabilities. You're watching CBS News 24/7. Chris Van Hollen of Maryland returns home from El Salvador today after meeting with Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the man wrongfully deported. Senator Van Hollen shared this picture of himself and Garcia saying, quote, "I have called his wife, Jennifer, to pass along his message of love. I look forward to providing a full update upon my return." So CBS News Department of Justice reporter Jake Rosen joining us live now. So Jake, the Homeland Security is saying they're really raising questions about Abrego, if he's involved in human trafficking. Kind of the first we've heard of that. So explain.
Well, this is part of the effort over the last couple of days to kind of reshift the narrative coming from the White House about who Mr. Kilmar Abrego Garcia is. Obviously, there's this framing that he is a Maryland man. Yes, that's accurate. He did start a family here and lives in Maryland. He's also a Salvadoran native who does not have the most clean past. There were instances we've confirmed here at CBS News of him allegedly injuring his wife, and she filed at least two temporary restraining orders. Those were later dismissed. There were never any criminal charges filed. Today's example from the Department of Homeland Security was another instance from 2022 in which he got stopped at a traffic stop in Tennessee with a number of other men who were undocumented. None of them had luggage, and they said that they were on an interstate journey. The state trooper or police officer that pulled them over said in his police report that it could have likely been some kind of example of human trafficking or human smuggling across state lines of people who were not here. There's never any criminal charges filed in this case. And really, the baseline here and the denominator is that for any of these charges, if any of them were even brought, which they haven't, is that he would have to be returned to the United States to have due process and for him to be able to defend himself against these accusations that the Trump administration is kind of digging up and launching at him as there are these increased efforts and mounting protests to return him back to the United States. And obviously, Mr. and Senator Van Hollen is at the center of all of that.
Yeah, it's a day in and day out update. So there is a lot of back and forth between the Trump administration and the courts about his return. So what is next in the case?
Right. So last night, the Department of Justice lost an appeal. They were trying to block the judge's order that requires daily updates that would make the government say what efforts that they're doing, which obviously we know that they have taken no efforts to return him back to the United States. But there are daily updates required, kind of amping up the pressure from this judge as she, over the next couple of weeks, is going to start having an expedited fact-finding mission. About a week from today, there will be a number of documents due to her from both the plaintiffs in this case, Mr. Abrego, and his attorneys, in addition to the Department of Justice, who has to have their 4 employees of the Trump administration deposed who have firsthand knowledge of kind of the operations behind the scenes in terms of what efforts, if any, ever have been underway to return him. Certainly, there's no hearing date set yet in this, but the judge said that she wants to have all the information in front of her before she can go down the road of potentially holding the government in contempt of court for not returning him in violation of her order.
All right, Jake Rosen. Jake, thanks so much. CBS News White House reporter Willie James Inman joins us now. So, Willie, during a swearing-in ceremony today for Dr. Oz, President Trump actually did take a question about the senator's visit to El Salvador. What can you tell us about that in his statements?
Yeah, that's right. This White House has fiercely criticized Senator Chris Van Hollen for his trip to El Salvador to meet with Kilmar Abrego Garcia. And the president had this to say earlier today. Take a listen.
He's a fake. I know him. I know them all. They're all fake. And they have no interest in that prisoner. That prisoner's record is unbelievably bad.
Now, the president also talked about Garcia's record, his criminal history, and the situation that he currently faces in terms of him being in El Salvador. And the White House has previously admitted that he was essentially deported by mistake, but they have really maintained that he should not be in this country, that he was here illegally, that he is somehow an alleged member of a gang. And the White House says that if he was potentially brought back here to the United States, that he could potentially be deported again. So this White House doubling down on the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, and really not mincing words in terms of their criticism for the Democratic senator, in this case Chris Van Hollen, for his visit and conversation with Garcia in the past couple of days.
All right, and Willie, the president also talking about efforts to reach a Russia-Ukraine peace deal. What do we know about that?
Yeah, that's right. This really has been in focus following comments from Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who essentially said that the U.S., that diplomats, including himself, aren't going to continue to fly around the world if Russia and Ukraine can't come to an agreement to end that years-long conflict. And the president backed Secretary of State Rubio up with his comments and responding to a question from our colleague Weijia Jiang. Listen.
Mr. President, what do you need to see from both sides in order to keep negotiations going? What do you want to see from Russia and Ukraine?
I have to see. My whole life has been one big negotiation, and I know when people are playing us, and I know when they're not, and I have to see an enthusiasm to want to end it. And I think I see that enthusiasm. I think I see it from both sides. And people think, nobody's playing anybody. We are going to see if we can get it done. I think we have a really good chance of getting it done, and it's coming to a head right now.
Now, Jules, the Trump administration is set to participate in conversations next week. We know that conversations are set to happen in Europe, I should say, in terms of ending this conflict. We do also know that a minerals agreement essentially has been signed. Remember, that was a huge sticking point between the U.S. and the Ukrainian side, and that didn't happen the last time around when President Zelensky visited here at the White House, essentially because of that blow-up that happened in front of TV cameras several weeks ago. But the president is saying that he wants to see enthusiasm. Other officials telegraphing that there's a limited time for Russia and Ukraine to come to some type of agreement. But President Trump, in this instance, saying that he wants to see an end to this war. He noted how many thousands of people are killed each week. Earlier today, unclear about those numbers or where the White House is sourcing those, but that's what the president mentioned as part of the reason why this conflict should end between Russia and Ukraine.
Okay, and finally, Willie, a second round of nuclear talks between the United States and Iran set for tomorrow in Rome. So what is on the table for that discussion?
Yeah, that's right. And this follows a meeting, indirect or a direct meeting, however you want to describe it. But there were conversations that took place in Oman last week, and this builds on top of that. The White House says, in fact, the president said earlier today that he wants the entire nuclear program from Iran to be dismantled. Now, there are reportedly some concerns about how the White House could go about doing that. Could there be a military response to destroy Iran's nuclear capabilities? But the president, the White House, at least hopeful in this instance that those conversations can continue to rein in Iran's nuclear ambitions. Iran, for their part, they say essentially that they want a fair deal with this Trump administration. So those conversations will continue in Rome. We'll, of course, bring updates as we have them, Jules. All
right, Willie James Inman. Willie, thank you so much. Our monitors take us to Tallahassee, Florida, where the community comes together in grief after yesterday's deadly mass shooting at Florida State University. CBS News correspondent Skylar Henry joining us now with some breaking news on this story. New developments today. Skylar, what can you tell us?
Hey there, good to see you as always. Well, the details continuing to emerge and trickle out as we learn a bit more, not only about the suspected shooter involved in that incident that happened here on Florida State University's campus, but also about the victims themselves. Police held a briefing earlier today where they say that the suspected shooter is still recovering from gunshot wounds that police actually fired upon him, and that he is likely to face first-degree murder charges. Now, if we take a look at the timeline that police recently put out, they say that this all happened approximately around 11 in the morning, that the suspect, Phoenix Eichner, arrived at Florida State University's parking garage. They say that he stays in the area for an hour, moving in and out of the vehicle. Following that, at around 11:51, they say that Eichner leaves the parking garage, and between 11:56 and 11:57 in the morning, that is when the first shot is fired. Eichner walks in and out of the buildings and in the green spaces here on campus, firing a handgun. By 11:58, multiple 911 calls were made saying that a male is actively shooting on campus, triggering simultaneous responses by police and nearby officers. And then 12 p.m., they say that the suspect is shot by responding officers and, of course, taken into custody, where we now know that he is recovering at an area hospital, and as the police chief said earlier today, likely to face those first-degree murder charges. But what is certainly exceptional and astounding to pay attention to when you look at the detail is the fact that all of this happened in less than 5 minutes. The fact that officers were able to respond so quickly to the calls, those 911 calls here on campus. We should also point out where we are right now. We're in the heart of campus. Just over my shoulder here, several dozen students are out here paying their respects to those who were injured and, of course, lost their lives. Flowers, makeshift memorials, really all across the campus here. We're learning so much more about the suspected shooter. Yesterday, they said that 20-year-old Phoenix Eichner had access to a handgun that belonged to his stepmother, an 18-year veteran with the Leon County Sheriff's Office. She, her sheriff's deputy herself, who actually earned Employee of the Month as recently as last March. That handgun was in her possession. They're still investigating to try to figure out exactly how Eichner was able to get his hands on her service weapon. And we are continuing to learn more about the victims as well, some of whom have already been ID'd, including 2 that have died.
Yeah, I was going to just ask you about that. 2 killed, 6 injured, and do we know any more about them? I do know that 2 of them, the ones that were killed, were not students.
That's correct. What we know about them, 57-year-old Robert Morales, who is a longtime dining services representative here on campus. He was identified by our CBS sister station down at in Miami, WFOR. And just in the last hour, we learned about the second person who died. His name is Tiru Shaba. He was 45 years old, a father of 2, and he is actually a resident of Greenville, South Carolina, who happened to be on Florida State University's campus yesterday as an employee of a campus vendor when Phoenix Eichner allegedly opened fire here on campus. They say that he is survived by his wife and 2 children. His family is now asking for the media to respect their privacy, but they have already asked for National Civil Rights Attorney Bakari Sellers and Jim Bannister to represent them as they continue to see exactly what happened here. They're looking to try to get to the bottom of why this happened and what caused what police say Phoenix Eichner to open fire here on campus. We should also point out that the victims who are in the hospital, still not sure if they were students or if they were other folks here on campus. The medical team that responded to the situation, they held a press conference earlier today and said that they anticipate that all of those who were taken to the hospital are expected to make a full recovery, but they did indicate that they did sustain significant wounds, including gunshot wounds to the torso and to the face. Some of those victims are actually expected to be released from the hospital today. Others had to stay for several more days, if not longer. But the good news, at least on that front, is that they anticipate that they all will make a full recovery. Again, as police continue their investigation as to why all of this happened, they're asking for anyone who may have pictures, videos, any additional information to reach out to Tallahassee Police, the Leon County Sheriff's Office, or the FBI as well, so that they can put these pieces of the puzzle together.
Yeah, and we will certainly respect that family's request for privacy as well. Skylar Henry, thank you so much. In the aftermath of the shooting, our own Major Garrett spoke with the vice chair of the Democratic National Committee, David Hogg. Now, for our viewers who don't remember, Hogg survived the deadly 2018 Parkland, Florida school shooting. So let's play a part of their conversation.
I'm thinking about my friends that are at FSU. A lot of the young people who worked with us in March for Our Lives that I had to text and say, hey, are you okay? And thankfully, the friends that I texted are okay. But there's a lot of students from Parkland at FSU. And what really bothers me here is that in Florida, we worked in a bipartisan manner to pass reforms after Parkland. We passed a red flag law that has been used over 19,000 times to disarm people that are risk themselves and others. And no law is perfect by any means, clearly. But we still have so much more work to do.
All right, now we want to go to some live pictures now and some sound from Chris Van Hollen, who just got back from El Salvador. Let's listen into what he had to say about his visit with Abrego Garcia.
Abrego Garcia, and bring him home too. We're joined by his wife, Jennifer, by his mother, Cecilia, by his brother, Cesar, and thank all of the rest of you who are joining us in solidarity with the Constitution and Kilmar. Look, I'm a little sleep deprived, and I want to be as clear as possible about what this is about and what it's not about. So I'm going to read the remarks that I wrote on the plane ride home. As the federal courts have said, we need to bring Mr. Abrego Garcia home to protect his constitutional rights to due process. And it's also important that people understand this case is not just about one man. It's about protecting the constitutional rights of everybody who resides in the United States of America. If you deny the constitutional rights of one man, you threaten the constitutional rights and due process for everyone else in America. The Fourth Circuit put it very clearly in its strong opinion yesterday, and I quote, "It is difficult in some cases to get to the very heart of the matter, but in this case, it is not hard at all. The government, in this case the Trump administration, is asserting a right to stash away residents of this country in foreign prisons without the semblance of due process that is the foundation of our constitutional order. Further, it claims, in essence, that because it has rid itself of custody, that there is nothing that can be done. This should be shocking not only to judges, but to the intuitive sense of liberty that Americans far removed from the courthouses still hold dear." They summed up the issue at stake perfectly. And that's why the Supreme Court, in a 9-0 decision, ordered the Trump administration to facilitate the return of Mr. Abrego Garcia. Now, the Trump administration wants to flat out lie about what this case is about. They want to change the subject. They want to make it about something else. And they are flouting the orders from the Federal District Court, the Fourth Circuit Court, and the Supreme Court to facilitate his return. That's why I traveled to El Salvador, leaving here on Wednesday. And I want to express my gratitude to members of my family and members of my staff who agree that we all must be prepared to take risks because of the current risk to our Constitution itself. In addition to having a variety of discussions on bilateral issues between the United States and El Salvador, I had two main goals. One was to urge the government of El Salvador not to be complicit in the illegal abduction and detention of Mr. Abrego Garcia and to release him. I made that request directly to the Vice President of El Salvador. The President was out of country at the time, and I've previously reported on that conversation. My principal mission was to meet with Kilmar Abrego Garcia. I told his wife Jennifer and his family that I would do everything in my power to make that happen. And last night, at about 6:40 p.m. El Salvador time, 8:45 p.m. here on the East Coast, I called Jennifer to tell her that I had met with Kilmar. And I told her what he said to me, which was first and foremost that he missed her and his family. And as he said that, you could see a tear go down his cheek. Now, getting a meeting with Kilmar was not easy. On Wednesday, I met with the Vice President of El Salvador and asked if I could meet with him. The answer was no. I asked if I returned the following week whether I could meet with him. The answer was no. I asked if I could call him on the phone. The answer was no. I asked if his wife Jennifer could call him on the phone. The answer was no. No to his wife, no to his mother, no to his lawyers. So the following day, which was yesterday, I decided to give it another try by driving to Sikot. Sikot is the notorious prison where Kilmar was taken when he was abducted. I was accompanied by a lawyer for Kilmar's wife Jennifer and mother Cecilia, Chris Newsom. About 3 kilometers outside of Sikot, we were pulled over by soldiers. You could see the rest of the traffic was allowed to go by. We were pulled over by soldiers and told that we were not allowed to proceed any farther. When I asked why, I was told that they had orders not to allow us to go any further. When I asked them if they knew anything about the condition of Mr. Abrego Garcia, they said no. And so much later in the afternoon, I was actually getting ready to catch a plane out of San Salvador back here later yesterday evening. And all of a sudden, I got word that I would be allowed to meet with Kilmar Abrego Garcia. And they brought him to the hotel where I was staying. And after that meeting, as I said, I called his wife Jennifer to report on some of the news of that meeting. And now I'm going to report to all of you about our discussion. When I told him that his wife and family sent their love and were fighting for Kilmar's return home every day, he said that he was worried about all of you. That was his response. How are you dealing with this horrible ordeal and nightmare for the family? He said that thinking of you, members of his family, is what gave him the strength to persevere, to keep going day to day, even under these awful circumstances. He spoke several times about your 5-year-old son who has autism. 5-year-old son who was in the car in Maryland when Kilmar was pulled over by U.S. government agents and handcuffed. His 5-year-old son was in the car at that time. He told me that he was taken to Baltimore first. I assume that was the Baltimore Detention Center. He asked to make a phone call from there to let people know what had happened to him. But he was denied that opportunity. He said he was later taken with some others from Baltimore to a detention center in Texas. And some point thereafter, I don't know whether it was period of hours or days, he was handcuffed, shackled, and put on a plane along with some others where they couldn't see out of the windows. There was no way to see where they were going in the plane. They didn't know for sure where they were going. They landed in El Salvador, and he was taken to CBS prison. He was placed in a cell with, if I recall correctly, and don't hold me to it, of about 25 other prisoners at CBS. He said he was not afraid of the other prisoners in his immediate cell, but that he was traumatized by being at CBS and fearful of many of the prisoners in other cell blocks who called out to him and taunted him in various ways. He told me, and this was yesterday, that 8 days ago, so I guess 9 days ago from today, he was moved to another detention center in Santa Ana, where the conditions are better. But he said despite the better conditions, he still has no access to any news from the outside world and no ability to communicate with anybody in the outside world. His conversation with me was the first communication he'd had with anybody outside a prison since he was abducted. He said he felt very sad about being in a prison because he had not committed any crimes. When I asked him what was the one thing he would ask for in addition to his freedom, he said he wanted to talk to his wife, Jennifer. I told him I would work very hard to make that happen. I told him that in addition to his family, that all of you who are here today were fighting to bring him home. I told him that his brothers and sisters in his union, the sheet metal workers union, were fighting to bring him home. That brought a smile to his face. I told him that millions of Americans understand that what is happening to him is a threat to their own constitutional rights. I told him about the decisions of the federal courts, the district court, the Fourth Circuit Court, the Supreme Court. And I think that in addition to knowing that his family was fighting for him, all of that gave him strength, the fact that all of you here were fighting for him. I want to say something about the Trump administration's efforts to change the conversation about what this case is about. This case is about upholding constitutional rights for Abrego Garcia and for every American. The President Trump and the Trump administration wants to say that those who are fighting to stand up for our Constitution don't want to fight gang violence. That is an outright lie. That is a big, big lie. I, for one, have been fighting against transnational gang violence, especially MS-13, for over 20 years, probably for longer than Donald Trump ever uttered those words, MS-13. Over 20 years ago, I worked to establish an anti-gang task force, a regional anti-gang task force in the Maryland, Washington, D.C., and Virginia area. I did it in a bipartisan way with then Congressman Frank Wolf and Tom Davis. And we have made substantial progress in this region. We have a long way still to go, but those efforts have resulted in progress. So I say to the President of the Trump administration, if you want to make claims about Mr. Abrego Garcia and MS-13, you should present them in the court, not over social media, not at press conferences where you just rattle stuff off. Because here is what the federal district court judge said about exactly this issue. This is Judge Zinnes. So she is the federal district court judge in the District of Maryland, where the case first appeared. This is a quote from her opinion. Defendants, and in this case, this is the Trump administration she's referring to, have offered no evidence linking Abrego Garcia to MS-13 or any terrorist activity. And vague allegations of gang association alone do not supersede the express protections offered under the INA, unquote. She emphasized this point, and I'm quoting, "No evidence before the court connects Abrego Garcia to MS-13 or any other criminal organization," unquote. In other words, put up in court or shut up.
All right, these comments coming from Senator Van Hollen. He is back with the family, Abrego Garcia's family right now. He had just visited Abrego Garcia in an El Salvador prison, and you might be able to see some of the family behind his wife to the right there. And he shared that during a conversation he had with Garcia, the first question that he wanted to know was, how is my wife and how is my son, his son who has autism? So he wanted to know how his family was doing before then he shared how he was doing. There was a photo of the two of them actually meeting at a coffee shop. He was not in prison clothing at the time. So these comments that you can see right there. So the comments coming from the senator after his visit, he will continue to make his remarks and also convince the Trump administration and others to bring him home. We'll continue to follow the developments in this case. But as it stands right now, the senator's back home. Abrego Garcia is still in prison, and we just saw remarks from the senator there. All right, we follow our map now to Massachusetts, where Harvard University's battle with President Trump escalates to a new front. The IRS is now considering whether to revoke the Ivy League school's tax-exempt status. So CBS News national correspondent Nikki Batiste joining us now. So Nikki, thanks for being here. Does the president or the IRS actually have the power to do that?
Julia, it's a good question. Federal tax law prohibits any senior executive branch members from requesting the IRS begin an audit or end an audit. So no, Donald Trump, President Trump, could not make that request. However, separately and independently, we are learning that the IRS is taking a look at whether or not to revoke Harvard's tax-exempt status. So this is still a big question mark and not out of the realm of possibility. This is a university, Harvard University, that has an endowment of about $53 billion, the richest university in the country. And many of those donations, large donations, coming in from overseas with no tax.
So the Trump administration also pressing Harvard to turn over its foreign funding records. What is that all about?
So the Homeland Security sent a letter to Harvard demanding any information on foreign students with visas, taking a look specifically at any illegal or violent activity. It was one of many threats in a letter from DHS later towards the end of this week. And that's significant because Harvard's student population is made up of about 25% of students from overseas. And along with those requests came, on top of the $2.2 billion in funding that the Trump administration had already taken from Harvard, Homeland Security also canceled $2.7 million in grants. So another hit for Harvard in this really ping pong match between the Trump administration and one of the most well-known schools in our country.
All right, Nikki Batiste, CBS News national correspondent. Nikki, thank you. A White House website that was dedicated to COVID information now turned into a site supporting the theory that a lab leak started the pandemic. We'll fact-check it with Celine Gounder next. Website that was once a resource for coronavirus pandemic information and free test kits has undergone some major changes. The page on the White House website now reads Lab Leak, the true origins of COVID-19. This comes after a CIA report found that the pandemic most likely originated in a lab, but gave the findings a low confidence rating. It also said that both lab-related and natural origins remain plausible. The new government website doubles down on the lab origin theory and accuses health and intelligence officials of suppressing the theory for political purposes. So CBS News medical contributor Dr. Celine Gounder joining us now to talk about these findings. Let's talk about the White House and the 2024 congressional report specifically saying COVID-19 most likely came from a lab leak in China, but many scientists still lean towards the natural origin. So unpack all of that for us.
So there's no smoking gun really for either theory, but the strongest scientific evidence still points to a natural spillover, most likely at that wet market in Wuhan in China, where live animals that are known to carry coronaviruses were being sold. There was genetic material from infected animals, including raccoon dogs, that was found in the same places where the virus was first detected at that market. And there's no direct evidence that the virus came from a lab. U.S. intelligence reports say the Wuhan lab did not have SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID, or a close precursor even before the pandemic started.
Okay, so the government claims the virus contains a genetic feature that does not exist in nature. Is that accurate?
So that claim is misleading because they're talking about a part of the virus, what's called the furin cleavage site, which helps the virus to infect human cells. And it was unusual when scientists first saw this, but that's because they didn't know to look for it. And since then, we've learned that similar furin cleavage sites are found in other coronaviruses that infect animals. So this is not a proof of virus engineering. It's really something that can occur naturally.
Okay, so CBS News reports the Trump administration actually replaced government websites with simplified messaging focused on the lab leak theory. Is that concerning?
Well, it is concerning because public health communication should really be grounded in facts and science, questions even, but not politics. And replacing nuanced scientific content with a single unproven narrative is really misleading to the public, and it does undermine trust in government guidance. And so if you have another pandemic or other crisis hit, you want the public to feel like they can trust the information they're being given, and this really does undermine that trust.
Okay, so there has been talk of a cover-up that Dr. Fauci and other health officials tried to suppress the lab leak theory. So is there any truth to that?
Yeah, I think it's really important to emphasize that during those 2024 congressional hearings under oath, Dr. Christian Anderson, Dr. Bob Gary, who were the two of the authors of that original Origins paper, Dr. Christian Anderson specifically under oath said that Dr. Fauci, Dr. Collins, were kept informed of what the paper was going to be saying. That's very different from saying that they had editorial control. And under oath, Dr. Anderson said, no, they did not have editorial control over this paper. They were just being kept in the loop, as you would hope they would be in the middle of a crisis like this. And Democratic members of that subcommittee where they had these hearings, where doctors Christian Anderson and Bob Gary testified, they reviewed extensive documentation, including emails, including congressional testimony, and they found no evidence that Dr. Fauci or Dr. Collins had any editorial input, that they tried to suppress the findings. They were just kept in the loop.
So why does figuring out the origin of COVID still matter today?
It matters because it has implications for how we'll prevent a pandemic in the future. So if there were biosecurity lapses at the lab, you would certainly want to prevent that kind of thing in the future. And I think it's something that we should be doing regardless of whether that was the source of the pandemic or not. At the same time, zoonotic, which means transmission from animals to people, historically have been the cause of almost every known emerging infectious disease pandemic in human history. And so that is definitely something we need to be addressing as well. And it doesn't have to be either or, but the more information we have as to how the pandemic started, the better we can be in how we prevent the next one.
Yeah, Dr. Gounder, thank you so much. Multiple federal health officials tell CBS News that the FDA is making plans to end most of its routine food safety inspections. And those efforts, most oversight would possibly shift to the states. It's part of billions of dollars in cuts aimed at shrinking the federal government. So the FDA currently outsources about a third of routine food inspections through contracts with 43 states and Puerto Rico. And some states have argued they can do inspections at a lower cost than the FDA while meeting the same standards. CBS News chief medical correspondent Dr. John LaPook talked to Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy about proposed cuts earlier this month.
You proposed more than $11 billion in cuts to local and state programs addressing things like infectious disease, mental health, addiction, and childhood vaccination. Did you personally approve those cuts?
I'm not familiar with those cuts. We'd have to go.
There's like more than 50 pages of cuts that I actually went through.
The cuts were mainly DEI cuts, which the president
There were
ordered.
a lot, but I'll give you, for example, about $750,000 of a University of Michigan grant into adolescent diabetes was cut. Did you know that?
I didn't know that, and that's something that we'll look at.
Higher risk routine food inspections will likely remain at the FDA, including inspections of baby formula and food imported from other countries. The FDA also does inspections in response to issues like last year's E. coli outbreak linked to a McDonald's onion supplier in Colorado. So Andrew Nixon, a spokesman for the Department of Health and Human Services, denied that the FDA was making plans to outsource oversight to states. An exclusive story right here on CBS News 24/7. It's a breakthrough win for a startup building brain chips. Next, you're watching CBS News 24/7. Now to an exclusive story here on CBS News 24/7, a breakthrough win for a startup building brain chips. The FDA just gave Precision Neuroscience the green light to implant what it calls a less invasive brain chip in patients for up to 30 days. The company says that chip could transform the lives of people with paralysis. So let's bring in tech journalist Yasmin Khorram. She has exclusive access into the company's lab. You were able to go inside there, learn more. You've been following this company.
I have.
And they gave you a look inside.
I have. They were kind enough to let me into their California lab. I learned a lot. Brain-computer interfaces are this massive industry that's gaining a lot of momentum. Morgan Stanley thinks that it can reach $400 billion in the future. Now, brain chips are basically this in my hand basically help people who suffer from paralysis control external devices, think a computer, mouse, keyboard, using only their thoughts. People who have ALS, Parkinson's disease, certain types of stroke. Now, I caught up with Precision's co-founder, Ben Rappaport. Ben actually co-founded Neuralink with Elon Musk a couple years ago, left Neuralink, came over to start Precision. Here's what he told me.
We're really focused on medical applications and finding ways to treat disorders of the brain and nervous system that currently really have no effective treatments. And I'm referring to certain forms of paralysis like spinal cord injury, ALS, certain forms of stroke, and brain-computer interface technology brings the promise of restoring function and independence and an ability to interact with the loved ones and the world that people living with those conditions now currently don't have.
Now, this is a milestone. When we think of brain chips, we think about this futuristic scientific thing that we maybe read or see in the movies. Now with the FDA's clearance, as you just said, to begin implanting for up to 30 days to record, monitor, stimulate the brain. This is a huge milestone and actually potentially viable sooner than we think.
So I'm looking at this in your hand, and to a layperson I should say, lame person, this looks just like a piece of tape, but this is actually the coating, and so that's what's implanted?
This is implanted. To me, it looks like a wristband. It's thinner than a human eyelash, kind of looks like a piece of Scotch tape. This is Precision's implant called the Layer 7 cortical interface. Their surgeons implant this in a minimally invasive procedure. This is what makes Precision a lot more different than the other companies we've talked about. Neuralink, that's backed by Elon Musk. Synchron, that's backed by Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos. Precision's is minimally invasive. It's a micro slit, I've been told. The patient is awake. And there's 1,024 electrodes in here.
That's fascinating. Okay, so you explain that. That is the difference then between his company and Neuralink.
That's the chief difference. There's a lot of different little things, but this is the chief difference. Minimally invasive. It sits on top of the brain. It does not damage any brain tissue.
Okay.
1,024 electrodes that monitor, record, stimulate any brain activity. And I was told as of today, 38 patients temporarily implanted. It's pretty remarkable. Millions of people are suffering from severe paralysis.
Right.
I know people, I'm sure you know somebody. So they are really aiming to, help and bring hope to those people.
Fascinating. Thank you for that look. And I guess you return that back immediately.
No, it's mine.
Oh, now it's yours.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's a souvenir.
Okay, and for Yasmin's reporting of the precision neuroscience, you can check out her Substack called The Y-Axis at yasmincorum.substack.com. You'll be talking about the findings in your visit there. Yasmin, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, it's like handing over the key to the city, but in zero gravity. Okay, the ceremony aboard the International Space Station next. Temu and Shein say they plan to raise prices for U.S. customers starting next week. The China-based e-commerce sites say it's the ripple effect from President Donald Trump's tariffs. Temu and Shein are known for their ultra-cheap products ranging from clothes and cosmetics to decor and electronics. All right, the change of command ceremony happened at the International Space Station earlier this afternoon. Alexei Ovchinin handed over command to Takuya Onishi of the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency. Let's take a listen.
This is a key from ISS. Now it's your key.
Ovchinin and another cosmonaut, along with NASA astronaut Don Pettit, will depart the ISS and return to Earth tomorrow. And check out this incredible drone video caught on Monday off the coast of Rancho Palos Verdes in Southern California. Look at this, a huge pod of dolphins spotted leaping in and out of the water. The person who posted the video wrote that it was very fitting to see that on National Dolphin Day. How did those dolphins know? It was their day. America Decides with Major Garrett is next, and you are watching CBS News 24/7.